Artless IO.
Hey everybody, John E Avocado here with the Purpose Your Passion podcast. And I've got Doug Brode with me, an author, an artist, and a guy that's been working in the sci-fi industry and a whole lot of movies and films that you would like to know a little bit about. We're going to talk to Doug today and find out a lot more about his awesome new book and some of the series that he's done on HBO and Cinemax. Welcome to the show, Doug.
Hi, good to be here.
Man, so the first thing we want to talk about is, of course, we want to promote your new book that you've got out. And it's the second in a series of, there's going to be a couple more books coming along the way.
Yeah, well, let's see. So this one released last year. This is The Ship.
The Ship.
And this deals with a woman, a waitress from a small town who wakes up inside a crashed, perhaps alien craft 35 years after she was abducted. And then it did quite well. So I decided to do a sequel. So the new one just came out last week, The Ship's Revenge. And this one takes place actually in 1958. And why Casey's in 1958 is a whole nother thing. But
it's all part of the story, huh?
Yeah. So, but it is a standalone enough that if you just jump into the second one, you'll be fine. I mean, I do explain what's going on. So
give some of that setup, some of that backstory so we can jump
yeah,
right
I
in.
mean, I try to make each book in the series, although they're a direct continuation, all of them take place in a different time period. So you can kind of jump in wherever you want. It definitely plays with time quite a bit. It deals with whether or not the gray beings are really alien, and whether or not those flying saucers are really alien and this and that. And then the second book, I wanted to tackle the whole, since I was in 1950s, I wanted to tackle the whole Roswell, and Roswell gets tackled in the first book, but the Area 51 and all that, because I had a big question that, okay, assuming that they had some sort of advanced, perhaps alien or perhaps not alien technology, why haven't we seen any residuals from that decades later? So right. I really wanted to answer that in this book. They'd be like, well, if they had something in 1958, did they lose it, or did something happen to it, or was there a reason that we didn't really end up getting anything from it? So,
oh, that's a pretty good twist on it, because that's a heck of a question to answer. The answer has totally been it's just a total cover up, but that seems implausible for those of us that understand a little bit about how reality works.
yeah, and my books are very much based in science. The second book deals with something called retrocausality, which people can Google, it's fringe physics, the idea of something from the future affecting the past. And that's what the second book deals with. The first book really is much more of a contained, you're on a crashed ship trying to escape it. And then she's 35 years out of her time. So her fiance is now an old man, and he's trying to get inside the ship to see if she's still alive after all these years. So I'm playing with time quite a bit, and I play with, I definitely use a lot of physics in there and a lot of science in there. And I tried to take, because I grew up with X-Files and things like that. So I try to take modern scientific theory and give what I thought was a plausible, realistic explanation to UFOs and those gray beings and abduction and all of that, and try to come up with something that I thought was plausible, that anybody would say, I buy that within a certain realm of believability in a sci-fi story. I buy that. So, because I don't really believe any of the answers that I hear in all these other things. I'm like, so.
Well, I think that's what science fiction does for so many of us, no matter how you consume that in a book or in a movie or whatever. It asks those questions that folks either haven't asked, or ask the questions in a new way so that we might get new information.
Yeah, but they never have answers.
Yes.
That's my big, like Prometheus. Really, the first half of that movie is really fascinating. I love the first half of that movie. And then they don't answer anything. So I make a promise that in each of my books, all the questions get answered in each of the books.
Oh, there you go. Well, see, that's a mechanic that so many authors use to get you to buy the next book, is to give you this big cliffhanger or to get some setup that they don't answer the full question to. But I really like episodic sections of all kinds of sci-fi. And I think maybe a lot of that might have been how I consumed it as a kid. And I wonder if there's going to be a pattern, a generational pattern, if some of that shifts. Because as a kid, a lot of the sci-fi that I consumed was all very small piece like that. It was many short stories. There were shorts on TV. It didn't have all of the support financially or even the space to operate in to be as big and as large as things like the MCU universe or even what Star Trek and Star Wars are now. And a lot of the media that the youth, because a lot of this pop culture is driven by youth, that the youth consume now are some of these more shorter segmented style parsers. If you just take this information in small pieces as to look for this whole large story to follow along with. Does that affect how you write? Do you write toward your audience in that fashion, or do you just write to find success?
That's interesting. I write the first draft for me, and then
Mm-hmm.
I write the second and third draft for the reader. So the first one I had the idea because I've sold and optioned almost a dozen scripts over the years, not including the TV show I had. And the ship I've had since 2010, I think. I had the idea for the ship, and I didn't want to give it away because even when you sell or you option a script, option means they get it for a certain amount of time. Even when you sell or option a script, it doesn't mean it's going to get made. And if it does get made, it doesn't mean it's going to be the way you want it to be. The film industry, I've been in it for 25 years now, 24 years. And it's not very pro writer. It's very much the script is the starting point, is the way they look at it. So I knew the idea for the ship for about over 10 years. And then during COVID, I'd already started it before COVID, but when COVID hit, I said, okay, well, I'll just sit down for 6 months and I'm going to write out everything. It took about a year and a half off and on to write the first book. But then the second book went really fast. The second book, I think I did the first draft in 4 months and then another 3 or 4 months worth of editing or rewrites, and then another couple months of editing with my editor. But the second book went a lot easier because I kind of had the ball rolling. But I don't look at it like I'm going to write something and worry about how well it'll be marketed or this and that. I wanted to take the sci-fi of the 80s and the 90s, like The Thing, Alien, X-Files, and just give it a modern scientific twist. And if somebody's interested in that, cool. My favorite musical artist is Prince. And what I always liked about Prince was take it or leave it, man. He's like, this is who I am. This is what I do. And like the worst Prince song, it's Prince. You can just tell immediately he had a certain vibe, a certain way of doing it. James Brown was similar to that. And so you have to kind of write, when you're writing a book, at least what you're passionate about. And then maybe in the rewrites, make sure it's shaped towards an audience that will be able to receive it and take it in.
Well, so that's a lot of actually what I do with my podcast here is help create that, making that creativity, turning it into productivity. And I do a lot of that in the invention space. So a lot of what you just talked about is really interesting to me, and I'd like to maybe ask and see if there's some parallels here. Now, one of the things as an inventor we have to do, it's always the question about, for us, it's, whether you're going to fund this yourself or you're going to try to license this idea and let somebody else take it. And when we do that, we give up that licensing opportunity, or we pursue that licensing opportunity. We have to give up a lot of the creativity or the intellectual options that there are and start to make some of these productivity options, and start talking about money and things like that. So in the invention process, we often do much like you do, and we work for ourselves first, and then we have to go through this stage where we have to work for the customer. That could be somebody that we're going to license with, or the end user, the consumer at the end. So when I also work with other more creative folks like songwriters and script writers like yourself, how do you put yourself into the right position to find people that connect to you? Now, I say this because oftentimes as an inventor, the way that we express our information is through sell sheets and informative, we do CAD drawings. But the thing that often sells it more than anything to those that are doubters is to put a physical object into somebody's hand to create that prototype. Now, to make something for the first time is a lot of investment, much like writing a book. You have to put all this front load investment into it and hope that all this work that you've put into it is something that somebody else is going to find valuable so that you can get a return on it. So what do you do to make your prototype, to make the work that you've done be appealing to somebody so they want to pick it up?
Well, that's getting more into the marketing aspect of it. you know, you create a product that you are proud of. I don't even think of my work as a product. My storyboards are a product. I'm sure we'll get into that. So I work in the film industry, so that's all a product. Like I help design Star Trek, that's a product. I get paid by Paramount to design weapons or whatever they need for Star Trek or Harry Potter or whatever, and that's a product. When I did scripts and I did TV shows, that's a product, especially when I did the HBO Cinemax show. I don't know if it shows up on the screen, Forbidden
Yes.
Science. That was a product, and I was not happy with the final product. They added way too much TNA in there than I had originally wanted. So, you know, that's the problem with when you create something. If you're thinking of it as a product and you hand it over to somebody, what they do with it, they're going to do with it. So my books, I try not to think of my books as products up until they're completely done. And I'm starting to think about the cover, and I'm thinking about the back of the book. I'm thinking about what's going to be out there and the actual selling of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm a big believer that you have to create something that if you feel the need for it, like for books, I can't really speak to interventions, but if you're like, this is a story that I have not read that I want to read, that's a pretty good starting place, assuming you know how to write. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there who don't know how to write, and that's a whole nother issue. But assuming you know how to write, or you know how to build, or you know how to do whatever you're doing, you have experience in it, then it's really more about creating something for yourself first. And then as you get closer to releasing it, making sure that, okay, you know, what do other people think? You know, you have people test it out, you have people read it or test your product or whatever, get their feedback. And then some you may take and some you may not. You know, I mean, famously, you know, Lucas showed Star Wars to Martin Scorsese, and he was like, "This is a Star Wars. This is a Disney movie." He's like, "You made a movie for kids. Like, what is this?" You know.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, you know, and you know, obviously, you know, Lucas could buy and sell Scorsese 10 times over, but Scorsese's a more respected director. So it's like, you know, the commerce versus creativity is a constant battle, but it should not be a part of your creation. It should just be a part of the latter half. So if there's 10 steps to it, step 9 would be where you start to think about other people.
Oh,
I think.
I appreciate that insight. So, because that space is very similar, where how you talk about that invention is what we do is we're looking for that need. And so, as a creative person, a songwriter or an artist or author like you find that need. There's these questions you want to have answered, or these stories that you want to have told. So let me talk to you a little bit about that creative process, because you have done quite a few things. Would like to tell everybody just a few of those accolades that you have? Because you mentioned Star Trek.
Sure.
Yeah.
Let's see. So let's see, what have I worked on? I did storyboards and conceptual art for JJ's Star Trek reboot. I did Iron Man, the first one, Thor, the first one. I did some work on Harry Potter, the third one. I did that's Prisoner of Azkaban. I did Men in Black International. I did Friday the 13th. I did Looper, which I still haven't seen. I hear it's good though. I mean, I've been in the film industry for 23 years, I think. I can't remember exactly, as the years change every time I say it. As a storyboarding conceptual artist, but that's very much a work for hire. You know, they'll come to you with a script, and then you'll talk to the director and figure out what their vision for it is, and then you know, you try to bring that to life. Film industry, especially now, is very much, you know how I was talking about like the last 10% and the last 9 to 10, it starts at level 8. Like they're already thinking about the marketing before they even start to make the movie. And I think that shows. And it's actually not ripping on the movies I've worked on, but just looking at the film industry in general, I think it shows that they're thinking about the marketing before they're really getting the idea down. It's a perfect example where I'm talking about. If, you know, if you're saying, well, why aren't they making good movies like they used to? Well, because back in the day, they were making the stories that they thought should be told, and they weren't, you know, everything gets test audienced, everything is reactionary. I do quite a bit of work on post work. So we'll have shot the whole movie, and then we'll go in and reshoot stuff based on people's opinions. And sometimes those opinions are right, or sometimes those are wrong. But that's a process that can start very early on. I've even worked on one movie that everybody's heard of that I storyboarded the film based on an outline, not even a script. And then the screenwriter would base his writing on my storyboards, and then I would revise the storyboards based on his script. And that's not an organic. The Godfather wasn't done that way. Even the original Star Wars movies, they were never done that way. So I definitely feel that, you know, modern film is a great example of what, if you were trying to be an inventor, not to do. I would say, you know, look back at the originals, like, you know, Mario Puzo, who he just had an idea to make a book about the mafia, and he was passionate about it. And now he did do it. If you see the new show, The Offer, you do learn that his books had not been successful, and he was looking for success. So he was aware that the mafia stories would sell, but how he told that mafia story was totally up to him. And he was not looking at a bunch of opinions about it. He was writing it, and then he would get opinions at the end once it was done, you know, but he was thinking commercially just by going in that avenue, you know. Me writing about something about UFOs or flying saucers or aliens and taking a modern scientific twist on it has a commerciality to it. But how I tell that story is totally up to me. And the commercial aspects are not thought of till later.
See, that's much of what I have seen. You talk about, that you can see in a movie that it seems so choreographed. You know, the story is
very
hitting,
choreographed. Yeah.
It's hitting all these high points. In fact, you know, especially in a lot of sci-fi, because I work in the up close to the game industry, you can watch a movie and go, oh, there's a scene right there that's going to be XXY is what you're going to hit on the game controller to make this dude jump over this, that, or the other thing. I mean, this is going to be a cut scene they're going to animate. I mean, you can watch the movie and see what's going to happen. So who in Hollywood now holds that vision that keeps that can make a movie like we used to? Can we make a movie now like we used to?
It's been shocking that the last two movies I've seen are both examples of having a vision. Tom Cruise waited a really long time to make Top Gun, and he was right to do it, and it was a fantastic movie. And then I just saw Elvis last night, and if ever there was a movie that had a man had a vision, the director, Boz Lehman or something like that, I can't remember his name. He definitely had a vision for Elvis, and it was a very artistic piece, very commercial. It's a good example of commerciality meets artistry. But generally speaking, you know, I love the Marvel movies, but they really have a formula. And you know, DC has been interesting in the fact that they've done like the Joker, which just happened to be a big hit. But even that, it was basically doing Taxi Driver. I mean, they were basically taking the 70s movies and updating it into a comic book movie. But there is a little bit of artistry left. But I mean, how many great artistic movies can you think of that you've seen in the last 10 years that didn't have tights or lightsabers or anything like that in there? And it actually has less to do with the creation of it as it does. Studios are not willing to put in $100 to $200 million into a project unless it already has a built-in audience.
Yeah.
And I get it. I mean, that's what streaming is doing for us. The streaming is giving us a little bit lower budget content where they can take more risks. So I would say there's more creativity going on in the streaming platform than there is in the theatrics. Despite Elvis and Top Gun, I highly recommend. They were both fantastic, but that's a fluke. I mean, you know, generally speaking.
Well, it seems to me like those two had, you know, somebody behind them that helped make that happen. Tom Cruise being the one, you know, and then the other is Tom Hanks.
Learman or whatever his name is. Yeah.
Right.
You know?
And so from the outside of the industry, I don't know about the people on the backside, but we talk about the, you know, art in film, and the few examples that I can remember again and again happen to have Tom Hanks in them. You know, he seems to be somebody that does that kind of work or can help carry the weight to make sure something like that can happen. Is that what you need? And do you have to have?
Well, you need Elvis. I mean, like both of these, neither one of these were original IPs, intellectual properties. Top Gun was Top Gun, and Tom Cruise is an IP unto himself. And Elvis, they needed Tom Hanks, but it's Elvis. And, you know, so those are already IPs. You may not think of Elvis as an IP, but he absolutely is. He is absolutely a property that everybody knows and everybody has an opinion about. And those opinions become talking heads on the internet. And that's the stuff they're thinking about when they make a movie like that, you know? So they get this great debate on whether or not he stole from Black artists and this and that becomes a topic. And there's a great scene actually in the movie. It's not a spoiler, but the Colonel Tom Parker, his manager, creates a button. He shows it to him and says, "I love Elvis," that we're going to sell. And then his mother finds one that says, "I hate Elvis." He goes, "Of course, why wouldn't we sell "I hate Elvis" buttons? You have to, why would I not want to make money on both sides of the argument?
Both sides of the equation.
So, you know, and that's the internet, that's YouTube, that's the argument, that's the stuff that propels a lot of what is popular today. Is, do you have an IP that people can talk about and have an opinion about, even if it's negative? That's fine, you know,
because that's that's what trends and that's what moves. So I want to talk a little bit, you know, and so that seems to, as a creative person, and working with other creative people, I oftentimes have to make sure that I don't get discouraged because so many high points of a vision or a thought or a story or an idea get rounded down by the process of taking something to market. And so you hit on something interesting to me when you talked about the cadence of a movie or the predictability of a movie. I'm not quite sure what words you used, but in the psychological terms, I mean, those are things that are familiar to people, to the reader, to the viewer or the consumer of any kind of product or story that we would tell, is the psychology of being prepared or scared or wondered or awed. It's the psychological roller coaster that we take someone through in their emotions when we tell a story. And as when we talk about that in, you know, on the invention side with a product or something, we talk about sales and sales strategy and the buying psychology. It's the predictability that people find familiar that often give them confidence, that make them want to do a thing, purchase a product, go see a show, stuff like that. And comic books had historically, in like the genre, the comic genre, is that they would tell a story. It was very segmented. It was very sequential. It was very predictable. It was when you broke up that predictability is when it was, you know, you could make a moment just by disrupting that cadence.
Frank Miller did that with a book called The Dark Knight Returns in the early 80s. And
right.
It became the most influential comic book of all time.
Right. So what suggestion might you give to somebody who's trying to work creatively in a space where so much of what you do gets rounded off? Can you give any advice to somebody how you could keep or hold a vision through all of this, all the quantification of the production side of this?
It depends very much on what you're making. On a film, there's so many moving parts. It's one of the reasons I prefer to write novels. I totally walked away from screenwriting. You know, it's fine for storyboards because I'm just a cog in the chain and it pays well. But, you know, I specifically went into writing novels because I didn't like all the voices. Now I have editors and they'll keep me in check and make sure that things make logical sense and make sure that you know, I'm telling the story to the best of my abilities. Perfect example is for the first book, The Ship. It was my first novel, and so I knew screenwriting, and so so when my first editor looked at it, it was a woman, and she said I had too many points of view. I had like 8 characters, so I ended up rewriting 35,000 words to cut that down to make it. I had to cut that out and then add a new 35,000 words to make it 4 POVs, point of view characters, to streamline it. So that was certainly a commercial decision because I wanted it to be easily read by a new audience so that nobody was lost. But that's a good example of artistry too. I mean, it makes it artistically stronger, but it also makes it more commercially viable. I didn't have that problem in my second book. The second book, it went a lot easier. So I mean, I had very minor rewrites. I think I added like about 7,000 or 8,000 words on my second draft, and that was about it. But yeah, I mean, I don't think that they're completely different. The idea of what is commercial and what is creative. What I'm saying though is that you should start and do 80% of your work should be from a creative standpoint. And then the last 20% is where you think of commerciality. You can think of it at the very beginning, be like, is this something that there's a need for, or is there a desire for? But then if that's step one, then steps 2 through 8 should all be your creative process. And then steps 9 and 10, you can then revert back to, then I start thinking about the cover, I start thinking about the blurb, the editing, all of the things that I need to get it to marketplace to make it a fantastic product that people will be like, this was a great use of my time, and I'm glad I enjoyed it, and this and that. So
I love that advice, and I mean that parallels inventorship so much. Is you have to not over-engineer your product. You have to solve the problem, which is what we were as an inventor we want to do, or as a storyteller filling that hole, right? And so that process going through there, that's a great parallel. I absolutely appreciate that one. So I want to ask you a little bit more about the industry. Because there's so many folks, much of the economy and much of creative economy has always worked in that gig environment. How do you, as a creative person, not feel the pressure to produce and allow yourself to be creative? Are there techniques that you use for yourself, or have you just allowed yourself or made yourself be accustomed to a pacing?
Well, are we talking about art or writing? Those are two very different things.
Okay, well, oftentimes many folks will see that as the same, or have to find where they
No,
meet.
they're very different, because I mean, I've been a professional illustrator since my first job was I was 17. I did a Led Zeppelin comic book, and I'm 50 now. So I don't know how many years that is, but it's a lot, 30 something, I guess, that I've been a professional illustrator, and every single job I've been paid for. So it is a commercial job. So I have never, what a client wants, I try to give them. Now I will bring creativity to it. I sit down with a director, and I'm working on a movie now, and we definitely had conversations about what was working in the rough cut and what wasn't. And I definitely let my opinions known inside the 4 walls of that room. And then we are making some adjustments to it. And so I am given a creative voice, but my job is to help the director make the best of his vision that he can.
Mm-hmm.
My job is not, like, I've been on tons of movies where nobody ever asks you, hey, do you like the script, or do you like this movie? And so I never say, and it's a job, and I'm paid well for that job. And with screenwriting, I found it to be a heartbreaking process. You pour your heart into a script that then maybe 100 people in the world are going to read. Even if it gets bought, they put it on a shelf. And then when you do get something made, like Forbidden Science, it was originally called Kinky Science, and it was supposed to be a sexy, fun take on cloning and Frankenstein and all of that, a modern Frankenstein story using cloning. And it was supposed to be kind of sexy and fun, but they went to the extreme, and there was far more TNA than I had ever intended. And then they changed the title to Forbidden Science, which I was fine with. But I didn't like not having any control over the product. And since the ship came out, I've had 3 different producers offer me option deals on it, and I've turned down all 3 so far. That's not to say I would never option it for a film, but I really like having the control of my product. I like it being what it is. And so my art pays for the commercial needs. My art pays my bills, and my writing, it makes some money, but it's not making nearly as much money as my art. So I balance the 2 by having 2 different avenues, Right. So somebody who's an inventor, they might have a 9-to-5 job. And if they have a 9-to-5 job, I would suggest maybe that you, if this is your free time, if this is your time to be yourself, then be yourself and create what you think should be created. And sometimes it'll hit and sometimes it won't. And that's just the way it goes.
That's great advice right there, man. I appreciate that. That's some good stuff, because that's what we oftentimes I'll run into other inventors, and you run up against that wall, or you have one idea that you want to just keep pushing through. And sometimes I have to counsel them. It's like, hey, if this isn't working, try another avenue, try another idea. So I appreciate that tenacity that you're sharing with us there. I want to step into the business world just a little bit here that you touched on. On the invention side, we oftentimes don't even know what we can put into a licensing agreement until we start to talk to other inventors or other folks and see what those options are. Now, a lot of my followers are creative people that work in the art side or in the writing side. Since you kind of work into both those worlds a little bit, what licensing options have you ever put into an agreement that you use to try to maintain creativity, or are there options? Is that a sellable product in your industry if you put too many options in there?
I don't know if it pertains to what I do, because what I do is a work for hire, the art. So, like for Thor, I designed all the Asgardian weapons and everything. They bring me in, I help design Thor. I have nothing to do with anything beyond that. I get a nice paycheck and that's it. In fact, a perfect example of that is Thor 2. I went with my wife, at the time was my girlfriend. We saw Thor 2, The Dark World or whatever, which I had nothing to do with. And more of my designs and props were in the second movie than were in the first, because all the stuff I designed for the first one that didn't get used, they ended up using in the second one. Like I remember his mother has this gold sword, which I based on the old Flash Gordon movie from the early 80s where everybody had gold swords. I thought, let's give all the Asgardians gold weapons and like Flash Gordon. And so I'm watching Thor 2 years later and I'm like, I did design that. I designed that. I designed that. I'm like watching all this stuff and like big moments, like she pulls out the sword all dramatic. And I'm like, holy crap. I had nothing to do with it. My name's not on that movie at all. Like I had nothing to do with that movie, but I had designed it for the first movie and they used it afterwards. But there's no like licensing stuff. I mean, as far as my books go, I have not allowed it to be licensed. Like I said, I've had so far 3 producers, not big producers. If it was a really big producer, I'd have to rethink it. But 3 producers who wanted to option it. So say they give me $1,000 and then they have the rights to do whatever they want with my project for 3 years. Having been on the other end of that as a storyboard artist working in the film industry that adapts books all the times, including the movie I'm working on now, it is not a good medium for authors. I did Pet Sematary, the remake, and that's a perfect example of, boy, talking about shitting on Stephen King. I mean, the original Pet Sematary was written by Stephen King. The actual script for the first movie was written by Stephen King. So if you want to update it, why not take his original script and update that? Instead, they went in a very different direction. And I'm sure Stephen King wasn't happy with it. I mean, I don't think he's been interviewed, or I'm sure he gave a nice face because he got paid for it, but there's no way he was happy with that movie. And I hear they just came out with Firestarter. They remade that, and I guarantee you from what I've heard from the critics, he was not going to be happy with that. I think he got like a 12% on Rotten Tomatoes. I don't know what it got on Rotten Tomatoes, but I know it's like really low. So at that point, you're like, was even filming the camera?
That's a childhood favorite of mine, Firestarter. I was excited about that.
Well, they want to reinvent it. And so when they reinvent it, then the original authorship of it gets pushed away. And so why would I, for $1,000 or whatever, or $1,500, maybe $2,000 for an option tops, give like one of my books away that they may or may not make a movie? Now, my wife would love me to do this because she's like, hey, think of all the sales you'll get if it gets turned into a Netflix show. But I've been on the other end of that, and I know that it doesn't always work like that. And you're not always happy with the product. So for $2,000, I'm willing to roll the dice. Major producer came to me with 5 or 10, I'd have to seriously consider it,
And so if you knew that they weren't just shelving your project. So now in the invention industry, that's sometimes something that happens, especially if you work in some of the large industries, like if you have automotive product ideas or aerospace, stuff like that. Your idea will be purchased and then it's what's called shelved. That happens
all the time in film industry too. All the time. I've had at least 4 or 5 scripts that I've sold that are shelved that the world will never see, which is exactly why I wrote The Ship as a novel. I mean, that's literally what instigated. I was like, I'm not giving this one away. I wanted people to read it. So
that's heartbreaking, because I can only imagine, some of the stuff we grew up as kids, the stories we heard, that impacted us so much. And you wonder why sometimes there's not great stories out there for us to read or consume. And there are some, but you would think that there would be more. Just like the movies, you would think that there would be more.
Well, The Bodyguard, like everybody knows The Bodyguard, right? Remember that movie, but written by Lawrence Kasdan. He sold that script before he wrote Raiders of the Lost Ark. That's what, like 12 years or something? He sold that script in the end of the 70s, and it got made, I think, in 1990.
So,
you
so
know.
can you give us a little, a step through of the industry? Because you took your what's called forbidden science now. What was it called before?
Well, originally I pitched as Kinky Science, but then once they started
Kinky
adding more
Science.
sex to it, you had to change the name because now it was just too pornish of a name. So it was a fun name back when it was a sexy, fun show. But then when they kept putting more TNA in it, we needed to change the name. So we changed it to Forbidden Science.
So you wrote your script first, and then you just started putting that out. How was that? Could you talk to us a little bit?
I wrote the pilot.
Mhm.
I was actually on the lot. I was making Star Trek at the time for JJ. I was designing all the props and weapons for that. And I got the call. I remember I was right outside the room where they were building the bridge. And I got the call from a buddy of mine that HBO wanted to make my show on their Cinemax channel. But that they wanted to make it more of a late night show. So that meant a little more TNA, but I had no shows off the ground. I had to take it. Like, I'm not an idiot, especially I was younger at the time. So I was like, absolutely. So then I had to go home and figure out I had to write the whole season. So I ended up writing, I'm credited with 12 out of 13, but I actually wrote 11 out of 13. And then another one I did a rewrite of I wasn't happy with. But I actually really wrote 11 out of 13 episodes. But it was a great experience. I mean, it was so much fun watching them film it. I went to Canada for, I don't know, a couple months while we made it. And it was a great experience. And I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. But it was also an experience that once I saw the final product, I was like, yeah, it pushed the boundaries farther than I was looking to go. And it burned us in the end because you had the audience that was a sci-fi fan that would watch this as there's too much TNA. And then you have the TNA audience who's like, there's too much talking in science fiction. So it couldn't appeal to anybody. So it got canceled after a season. And I felt like, it was a great experience. I don't regret it at all, but I definitely grew from that. And I did sell and option a few other scripts after that, quite a few actually. And then when they just kept being purchased and then put on a shelf, I was just like, what's the point? So I decided, I'm going to take the ship, which was an idea I've had for so long. And it was my favorite idea. And I decided I'll make that into a book. And then I had to learn how to write a book, because learn how to write a screenplay and how to write a book are very different things. Structurally they're the same, but you have to change the way you write. So that took a couple of years to learn that. I even took classes and stuff on how to learn for screenwriters going into books and how to learn how to write for books. And, because there's a lot more grammar involved in scripts. You don't really worry about the grammar and the sentence structure and this and that, and so I finally got to the point where when the ship released, I stand behind every single sentence of every single paragraph of 330-page book. And that takes a long time to get to that place. So,
yeah. So you had worked with, you had to have somebody else write one of the, or not had to have, but somebody else wrote one of the
two of the episodes, and then I
episodes.
rewrote one of them because of a time crunch. Yeah.
How did that feel to have somebody else write within your IP?
Oh, I was fine with it. I needed a little bit of the weight taken off. I was really under the gun to write an entire season in just a few months. And, so I was really under the gun. And so, I gave them a couple one-off episodes that weren't going to drastically move the story too much. That were just like, not filler episodes, but basically filler episodes. Something that was just a one-off. It wasn't part of my overarch mythology that I was going for. When I wrote the series, after the pilot got bought, I wrote the middle 2 episode part, property parts 1 and 2, and that set the tone for the whole series. And then I wrote the finale, and then I went back and wrote the episodes in between the beginning, middle, and end to kind of flesh it out. And it was a weird way of looking at it, a weird way of writing, I guess, from the outside looking in, but it made a lot of sense to me at the time, because the middle gave me the heart of the show and the end gave me where I'm going. And then I was able to just kind of fill in the dots along the way. I wouldn't write a book that way, but it did work for a TV series.
Right. It seemed pretty structured. So if you can develop what that structure
is. Everything's a structure, I mean, it's just how well you can hide that structure. My biggest complaint with a lot of modern movies would be that they don't hide the structure at all. Like even my wife can figure out, okay, well, here's where the first act ends, and then here's where the second act ends. I remember seeing a kids movie with my kids. I have young kids, and we're watching, and there was a scene where it was a Garfield movie, and he was like, "This is the worst day of my no, this is the dark night of my soul," or something like that, like a really dramatic line. And that is at the end of the second act of every story. You have the dark night of the soul of that character. It's in every story, but it's not hidden very well anymore. So I try really hard in my books to hide the structure a little bit, you know. One of the great things about doing time travel and going back and forth in time is you can have that structure, but it can be hidden a little bit with the time travel.
I see. I think that's good artistry. That's the difference between producing something and crafting something. You know,
Exactly.
you can make a chair.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, you can make a chair that's functional, but if you make it beautiful, you don't even recognize the structure of the chair other than its form. And so I think artistry, you know, that's where we often want to get. That's pretty amazing. That's fantastic that you were able to make that transition so that you could. So you took classes, you said. How long did that take you?
Well, I just took a night. I mean, I've been writing for over a decade, and I'd had some writing achievements, but writing a book was a very different beast. And so I did take a writing class at UCLA, night classes. And really, the best thing I got from that class was just keeping me accountable. I walked away with a 100-page first draft, and then it sat in my drawer until COVID. And then COVID hit, and I was like, my wife's because the film industry shut down. And I wasn't doing anything. So my wife was like, well, why don't you just start writing? So then I took 6 months straight, and I wrote up the ship. And then another 4 or 5 months worth of editing on top of that. So, but yeah.
Could you give us a little insight to that process to put your book in front of somebody? So you knew a lot of the folks in the industry to put like a screenplay in front of, because you've been working that. When you switched over to doing books, did you already know some folks in the industry, or did you have to go find those contacts? How did you let somebody even know that you had a book for sale?
Well, I had when I had finished, I guess, like the second draft, I was still going into a third. I think the first book there was 4 drafts of, but the last couple of drafts are really just like making sure it doesn't suck, making sure that everything makes sense. But when I was in that process towards the end of the book, I had 2 roads I had to go down. I had to either I have contacts in the publishing world, or contacts through the film industry that have contacts in the publishing world. But if you go down the publishing route, traditional publisher, I couldn't do a series. And while I was writing the first book, I knew that's why the second book went so easy. I knew what I wanted to do with that second book. And anybody who reads the ending of the first book, while the first book is a complete story with a beginning, a middle, and end, that end really does sort of say, wow, I wonder what happens next. So it left the door open, even though it is a complete ending. Just like in Star Wars, Darth Vader's still alive at the end of Star Wars. You're like, oh, I wonder what happened to Darth Vader, so you leave that door open. So I didn't want to go traditional publishing, because then they decide whether or not to get to do a TV series. And then I'm right back in the same route that I am with my screenplays. People telling me what I can or cannot write. I make a pretty good living as a storyboard artist. I should be able to use that to believe in myself enough to I created Alien Sky Publishing. I created my own publishing company. It's got a nice website. You can go to alienskypublishing.com. And I got to design the covers myself. Now, I didn't create the covers, but like if you look at this cover, like I sketched this out before I even drew it, before I even wrote the book. And so it's a great idea of visualizing something and then it becoming reality. And then I had an artist paint up my vision for it. And it was a little bit different. I remember the ship was actually, I think it said it in the middle underneath his eyes, and the ship was lower. And she brought it down because I asked her to make it look like a movie poster. So she brought it down a little bit. And then we've had to keep that for the second one. But like for each one, and then, I design all of this stuff, and then I have an artist, a painter, finish it up. But I like that process most of the time. Sometimes I'm screaming and yelling and frustrated that things aren't working out the way I want, but generally I like that control. I have so little control in my 9-to-5 filmmaking job that I have no interest in handing my books over to a publisher. I mean, because say you get a publishing deal, they'll give you usually between a $5,000 and $10,000 advance. That's not worth it to me. So I'd much rather publish it. I'd much rather spend $5,000 or $10,000 on my own book, and then maybe I'll make a profit from that, and maybe I won't. But I'm in the position where I would rather live or die by my own,
That's
work.
that's the place we all want to be, where you can afford to make that investment in yourself and then put it out into the world, and it'll survive.
I think we can
on
all
its own.
afford to do it. I would make the argument that, whatever you have to do it the way you want to do it, it goes against the grain, but I would actually say that's the best way to do it. For where I am in my life, if I was 25, I would feel very differently. But at 50, I've accomplished enough in my life that I feel like I know enough about writing and enough that I can say I don't need a lot of hand holding. So they're not doing a lot for me. We were talking, I mentioned Prince earlier. Here's a guy who, halfway through his career, a little over half, he walked away from the music industry to do it himself, because he already kind of knew what he was doing, and he didn't have that Warner Brothers backing. And so he didn't have as many hits. I don't think he had any hits after he left Warner Brothers, but he was still doing what he wanted to do, So
Exactly.
it just comes down to what you want. If your money is your main goal, then yeah, you got to play with the big leagues and you'll lose all control. Money was not my main goal with writing the shit novels. It was to write the best novels I could and to have them released exactly the way I wanted them released.
Oh, man, that's fantastic, Doug. Well, I'm glad that you were able to find that for yourself and make those avenues, because that's something that I often preach to all the folks that I talk to is that, we don't sit around and wait for opportunities. You make opportunities, you can create them. And if you get yourself educated, figure out what it is you got to do and work within some place that you already got a little bit of experience, man.
And then on top of that, though, you have to be honest with yourself. You have to be honest with yourself before you release any product. Is it truly up to the level? And that's the hardest thing for a newer person to know. Is it truly up to the level that it needs to be before you release it? Because I had 12 years of screenwriting behind me before I wrote my first book. And even that, I ended up doing a 35,000 word rewrite on the second draft because of some notes I got. Some people would not be willing to do that. Some people would be like, oh, I know what I'm doing, I'm fine. And that's death. So if you're going to go your own route, you have to be able to really make the honest to God calls that, okay, this is not ready or this is not good enough yet.
Oh,
and if you can't do that, then you should have somebody to hold your hand and go the production route.
Well, so, and that's one of the interesting things you pointed out there, is especially with the way the gig economy has evolved recently, is there are so many options for folks to connect with the part of it that you're not good at, the part that you're not as capable with or as comfortable with. And you said something earlier that talked about how, even though the process of production is very, I'm not sure how we said it, mechanized, it helps create a better product. If you go ahead and use the tools of the trade to refine what your work is, you can create a better product in the end. And so there's a lot of information out there for all sorts of creative people, whether you're writing or inventing or artistry, to help you filter, or I shouldn't say filter, to edit to your own work to get it up to a standard that you'd want to put out.
Yeah, but you have to make sure you're getting advice from the right people, because you go online. Like, I learned a lot from YouTube when I was figuring out the business end of how to put together my first book, but I wouldn't listen to any of those people when it came to writing. I mean, I'm amazed that, there's a lot of self-publishers out there that are just awful. They're just not ready to be writing. They're not good enough to be published through a traditional publisher. I probably am good enough to be traditionally published. I know I am. I mean, I've gotten the offers. I have no interest in doing that. I'm making the choice not out of a need, but out of a creativity aspect. So you have to really know, are you really ready to release whatever product you are? And if you're going to take advice from people, make sure you're taking advice from people who have really done it. My wife really likes this guy called Tony Robbins. And I did some 2-day thing with her or something online where, to be a good husband, I watched, but he made some good points. And one of them was that he wanted to learn how to play polo or something only a rich person would ever ask to learn.
Right.
But he flew in the best polo player in the world to teach him how to play polo or how to ride a horse and then play polo. And while we can't afford to do that, be careful who you're getting your advice from. Look at how many, like, if you're going to get advice from somebody on how to market something, make sure that they marketed something truly successful. If not, don't listen to them, because their advice is no better than anybody else on the street. So there's a lot of voices out there. So I would say, no matter what your field is, you're going to learn from somebody who's been successful at what specifically they are telling you about.
That's great advice right there, Doug. That's something I run across all industries, is you got to look out for people. The loudest person isn't the smartest person.
Oh no, YouTube's filled with voices.
Yep. So that's fantastic, Doug. So let's get this wrapped up, or I would talk to you and spend your whole Sunday talking about your pretty amazing career, because you've done it all. You've worked in the books, you've worked in books now, you've worked in the film industry, and you've been an artist for a whole lot of projects that all of us really love in the sci-fi and the comic world. So I want to thank you as a fan of a lot of your work that you had part of doing. Thanks for being such an amazing professional and help make it elevated to be something that we all enjoyed.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm very proud of some of the movies. Yeah, I mean, like Star Trek, Harry Potter, Iron Man, Thor. Those are really, good movies. I hear Looper's great. I haven't seen that one yet. So the problem is when you storyboard something for like months and every shot of the movie, there's really no incentive to sit down for 2 hours and watch the movie. I already watch it up shot for shot.
I worked on one of my first gigs was to work on a game. We were modding Neverwinter Nights, and we spent so much time figuring out to play this game. We were just writing code after code after code, and the running joke was, there's a way to play this game that's not looking at 24 characters on the keyboard. So I totally feel you there. So Doug, I absolutely appreciate you coming on the show. I want to close out and giving everybody an opportunity to find your book. So where can they find your book at if they want to purchase your book?
Available everywhere online, but I would go to Amazon. I personally shop from Amazon, so I'll plug Amazon. But yeah, you can get The Ship and The Ship's Revenge. They're available on the first one's available on ebook, audiobook, hardcover, and paperback. This one's available on all of them except for audiobook, which comes out in August. So the audiobook for this one comes out in August. But if you're an audiobook person, the first one is available and you can jump in. The ebooks are really cheap. The ebook for the first one, I have it 99 cents for a month, because this one just came out. And this one, the ebook is only $2.99. So if you just want the ebook version, this month they're very cheap, but they'll go back up in about a month or so. But yeah, please do, if you want to, support a new author, a fellow artist like yourselves, I'd appreciate it. So
man,
you might be surprised. It might be pretty good.
Man, it sounds right up my alley here, man. I'm gonna have to find the time to read me a book here pretty soon. I honestly don't get to read near as much as I used to. And I tell you,
that's why I created the audiobooks. That way they can listen to them on their way to work.
There you go. That's how you fit that time in there. Well,
I got a great audiobook voice actor too. His name is Zachary Johnson. He's known in the LA film industry and this and that. He does really good voices. So he did characterizations to all my voices and characters and stuff. He did a really good job. So
that's how do you
he's doing the second one right now, actually. So that one comes out in about a month. So, but yeah, if you like audiobooks, I think it's $9 on Amazon for the audiobook, and he did an incredible job. The second one I think will be a little more expensive, but if you have one of those Kindle Audible credits, then it's just one credit. So
heck yeah. Well, that's fantastic, man. Well, I appreciate you sharing.
I try to get you no matter where you are. So if you're in your car, there's no reason. Turn off the hip hop music and put on The Ship.
How many more inspirationals do you need? Listen to The Ship and get really inspired. There you go. That's right.
A woman stalked by a monster. Nothing more inspirational.
I tell you, a little fear can make anybody get something done sometimes.
Well, thanks for having me. This has been fun.
Absolutely, Doug. I totally appreciate you coming on the show. I appreciate your work, and folks putting out there, making things, crafting things, and putting them out in the world, so that the rest of us can enjoy.
I hope my advice helps somebody out there.
Absolutely, Doug. So that's part of why I wanted to get you on my show. It's the Purpose Your Passion podcast, and it's to help people recognize that if they have the right drive and put themselves in the right place and work hard and find the right tools, you will find success. So absolutely, everything that you've told us today is going to help somebody get farther down the road. So thank you so much.
I would add to that, follow your passion. The success is the secondary part.
There you go, man. That's what it's all about.
People who chase after just success rarely get it.
Yeah.
George Lucas was not chasing billions of dollars when he made Star Wars.
No,
he really wasn't. He loved Flash Gordon movie serials that he grew up with, you know. So, you know, keep that stuff in mind. It may be commercialized now, but the original invention was not commercialized at all. In fact, everybody thought he was insane. He made American Graffiti, which was a huge film, and then he was going and making a weird thing with a guy who was furry, and the studio was telling him that Chewie had to wear pants, like, you know. So,
space opera.
Yeah, you know, follow your passion and then let the success come. And think about the marketing, maybe at the very beginning to make sure it's a commercial idea. And then the last 2 steps towards the end. But make sure that the steps 2 through 8 are all about the creativity.
Oh, man, great information, Doug. Great advice and great inspiration. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
I'm going to close it out here. I'm John E Avocado with the Purpose Your Passion podcast, and we're here with Doug Brode and talking to him about his book, The Ship, and what was the second? The Ship's Revenge. And so, as always, dream, plan, do. Get out there and do something, guys. We'll see you next time.
Artlist.io